We're going to start today with the fallout from Monday's historic election. It answered some questions, but it also raised new ones. The Tories picked up 24 new seats, but leader Pierre Poilievre lost his own, one he'd held for 20 years. The Conservative result prompted criticism from Conservative premiers.
Last time I checked, Pierre Poilievre never came out in our election. Matter of fact, him or one of his lieutenants told every one of his members, "Don't you dare go out and help the PCs." Isn't that ironic? But anyways, I'm not going to dig deep into this. The people spoke, and I have no say in who people vote for. But I'll tell you one thing. We have a government, democratically elected. I will hold them accountable.
I think the Conservative Party of Canada was very good at pushing people away, not so good at pulling people in, and I think that they probably saw that in some of the results they had across the country.
Poilievre, meanwhile, has signaled he plans to stay on at the helm of the party, and one of his re-elected MPs in Alberta has stepped aside to allow for Poilievre to run there. Across the aisle, Prime Minister Mark Carney is now tasked with uniting the country, despite more than 55% of voters casting a ballot for another party.
It depends very much on whether we have pragmatic Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney as our Prime Minister, or whether we have environmental extremist, keep it in the ground, phase out fossil fuels, author of the book Values, Mark Carney, as Prime Minister. And I don't know the answer to that yet. I don't think Canadians know the answer to that yet.
Our Sunday strategy session is here to dig into all of it. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and Director of Communications to the late Jack Layton. Corey Tonight was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former Director of Communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid is a former Communications Director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody. Feels like It's been forever. You were stuck with me for so long over the week. Thank you very much for making the time. I want to go kind of party by party, if we could, and start off with the government. A ton of news, Scott, late in the week. Specific dates. There's going to be a meeting with President Trump in Washington on Tuesday. The King is coming to deliver the throne speech. First time something like that's happened since 1977. What is your read on what the first few days of this new government tells us about what it will be like?
I think people should take their cues from the press conference. Jam-packed with news. Very matter of fact, not a lot of hyperbole, not a lot of rhetorical flourishes, just straight to the facts, ma'am, and boom, boom, boom. And I do think you're going to get a lot more of that out of Carney. He looks like a guy who says, all right, I've got the job I asked for, now I'm going to do the job I got. And so we got a ton of news. We know some key dates. He's going to go to Washington next week. That's going to be a gigantic event, obviously. Presumably it's going to set the terms and the construct for the economic and security arrangements that we're going to try to renegotiate with the United States. Then he's going to pick his cabinet, put that all in place, including his own office. Then, we have a parliamentary session with the King, as you say. And so there's, no moss growing underneath Mark Carney. And I think we can also extract something else from it. I do not believe this guy's an incrementalist. And he may have had a election night that produced a slight minority, a strong minority, a slight, hold over Parliament over top of him. I think he's going to move. I think he is going to be bold. I think it's possible this guy's going to be a radical prime minister. The sense is he's not screwing around. He's going to get things done, and he's going to move. And I don't think he's going to fret about whether or not he alienates one party or another. I don't think he's worrying about whether he needs to form structural pacts with other parties. I think he's going to put his program into action and, damn the torpedoes.
That would be a much easier task, Corey, if you had a real majority, right? He is 4 seats short of one right now. He very explicitly told reporters in that press conference that there would be no formal arrangement with the 7 NDP MPs, for example. Do you think he'll be able to do what Scott laid out in not being incremental, for example?
I think so, and I think so for a few reasons. One, none of the the opposition parties that aren't the Conservatives, so the BQ, the NDP, and the one Green MP are going to be anxious to have an election anytime soon. So I think he's got quite a bit of breathing room because of that. But I'd also say, because on some of the agenda items, there was a lot of overlap with the Conservative Party. And I think there's an opportunity to actually ignore those other parties a bit on some of the big items that were in that platform, particularly around things like energy corridors. Like, I think why play to the fringes when you can play down the center of the fairway? And I think on those things, there's an opportunity to do so. I hope that that's what we see for the good of the country.
Kathleen, what are your thoughts on how probable or possible it is to advance an agenda that is aggressive in nature? And does the moment kind of allow for it in a way that it might not have at different times?
Prime Minister Carney was really clear in his press conference that while during the elections, Canadians may have cheered for other political teams, but now that there was only one Prime Minister and that he intended to get the job done, move quickly, as Scott said, but also, assume that he has the mandate. He reiterated several times the strength of his mandate, more votes than have ever been cast for his party, the majority in 7 out of 10 provinces. He really believes that he has the mandate to go forward, and it's true he does. Because frankly, the Bloc has already said that they basically will give Mr. Carney and the Liberals a pass for the first year. The Conservatives will be scrambling to get their own leader back into the House and determine who in fact will be the opposition leader. Because remember, Mr. Carney has a very heavy policy agenda that he plans to get through, tax cuts, other measures, all before Canada Day on July 1st. So all of that policy, including a speech from the throne, possibly a budget, will all be done before Mr. Poilievre even potentially gets back into the House.
Let's switch to the Conservatives and where things stand, Scott, because it has been an interesting week. We were all together on election night when Pierre Poilievre indicated he would stay on as leader. It made sense because of the increase in, despite the loss and against expectations in particular, but the increase in vote share, the increase in seats was pretty historic for the party, particularly where the vote share is concerned. The next morning, though, in the wee hours of the morning, we found out he had lost his seat. We now find out that someone in Alberta has decided to step aside so he can run there. Caucus meets in person to even determine whether they're going to use the Reform Act on Tuesday. And then there's this fight with all the progressive Conservative premiers and Tim Houston and Doug Ford. I hope I've encapsulated it all. Where does that leave Poilievre, Scott?
Well, it's been a bit of a scrambled breakfast since election night. And, I think he'll make relatively short work of the question about his leadership. I think he'll seek that by-election. I think he'll win that by-election. I think he'll face down his caucus. I don't think there's a real appetite for displacing him. And I know for sure there's no strong, capable alternative who could take an actual run at him. So I think that drama is going to dissipate pretty quickly. He's going to lead the party into the next election. I do think, however, if they're going to be successful in that next election, they should stop telling themselves that they won the last one. They did not win it. And yes, they improved their votes. And yes, they staged a pretty impressive comeback and rally of votes in Ontario in particular in the last 10 days of the campaign. But they do not sit in government. They didn't win. And so when Jamil Javani goes off like a SpaceX rocket, or when Andrew Scheer tries to persuade you on television that the Conservatives own Ontario and got more votes than Doug Ford, and when for whatever reason they think it's more advantageous for them, rather than to sit and reflect on the things they need to do, the changes they need to make, the adjustments they need to embrace in order to succeed next time. Instead, they'd rather fight with Doug Ford and Tim Houston. I don't know. I think the Liberals are going to make a sandwich, sit back and watch the movie, because it's absolute gift to them. And for the life of me, I cannot figure out this impulse for intramural warfare on the part of the Poilievre clan.
Do you think under a Poilievre-led Conservative Party, Corey, that there is the capacity to mend the rifts that exist, for example, with Premier Ford and Premier Houston, to acknowledge that that is something that would be favorable for them in the future? Because to Scott's point, for example, with that interview with Andrew Scheer, it was, at the end he said, like, bygones should be bygones. We should all be together as Conservatives. But the first, like, 3/4 of it was, literally saying it's a fact that we got more votes in Ontario.
Well, it's a fact that you're not going to be successful if you spend more time fighting people on your team than you do fighting the Liberal government. Look, there was a reason why Stephen Harper was successful and why Brian Mulroney was successful. Stephen Harper spent a lot of time attracting people like John Baird and Jim Flaherty, getting people from Atlantic Canada who are much more red Tories than he is, like Peter MacKay, to run and play senior roles in his cabinet, and to create a team in which different parts of the country could see themselves reflected. That's what you do if you want to win. And to throw barbs at Ford and Houston and others and blame them for your problems in the election campaign, it's big time small d energy. And I don't think it's something that is gonna help them with the work that's ahead. I think it's possible to rebuild those relationships, but you got to try, and the way to try is not to hurl blame at them for your own inadequacies during the campaign.
Kathleen, what are your thoughts on Poilievre's prospects as leader?
A couple things. First of all, I think, I don't think that Ford and Houston are actually Mr. Poilievre's biggest problems. Frankly, Premier Moe and Premier Smith sometimes cancel them out in terms of who's cheering and who's jeering for Mr. Poilievre. I think the bigger concern is what actually the caucus is going to do for a number of reasons. First of all, the biggest gift Mr. Carney, Prime Minister Carney gave to Mr. Poilievre today was not, in fact, even admitting that he's going to call a by-election as soon as he can, so Mr. Poilievre could get into Parliament. The bigger gift was, in fact, that his meeting with Trump is on Tuesday, the same day that the Conservative caucus will meet for the first time. That is a gift, because all eyes will be on Washington, and they won't be prying into the room of the Conservative caucus. Because remember, it took 8.5 weeks for the Conservatives in 2019 to kick out Andrew Scheer. It took 19 weeks for the caucus to boil over and finally get rid of Aaron O'Toole. So sometimes these things take time. So I'm not saying it's for certain. I think probably you're starting to see Conservatives like Michelle Rempel and others, unlikely suspects, frankly, rally around Mr. Poilievre in terms of his leadership, calling for the stability to continue to grow the party. But I just wouldn't say it's done yet, that there's still a possible for fratricide.
Corey, you want to jump in?
I would say it's done. I would say it's done. I don't see, for the same reasons that Scott said, there's no serious challenger out there to Poilievre, and the caucus for the Conservative Party is even more united behind him after this election, in the sense that there are a bunch of new members who've been elected under his banner. There are a number of people who were appointed to their candidacy who are very strong Poilievre loyalists. So I think he came out of that campaign with more caucus support than he had going in.
We'll leave it there for this discussion. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it. Kathleen Monk, Corey Tenike, and Scott Reed, our Sunday strategy session.